Welcome, Sylvia Acevedo, who has just recently, I guess, stepped out of her role as CEO of the Girl Scouts, which she led on through an incredible transformation, and I'm dying to hear about that. But before we get there, tell us a little bit about your story. You wrote this wonderful book called Path to the Stars, which really talks about going from a little teeny town with dirt roads to Stanford to NASA to become a rocket scientist. I'd love just to have you tell us a little bit about that journey.
Thank you very much. You know, Rita, it's a real pleasure, and I just love reading and listening to you. I've learned so much from you, so thank you. It's a real honor to be here. And yeah, the book, Path to the Stars, I wrote it because as I was giving talks to kids, one time I walked out of the auditorium and I saw a really long line. And I said, hey, is that the line for lunch? And they said, no, that's the line of kids who want to talk with you. And I thought, wow, being an engineer and a systems engineer, I realized that doesn't scale for me talking to each kid. And I knew I had to write a book. But in addition to that, the reason I chose middle school was that that's kind of the last time that's like kind of a sweet spot of being able to get young students interested in math and science. And today that matters so much as the world is being rebuilt around technology. So I kind of think about that proverbial elevator door and that book kind of sticking in there to keep the doors open. And that was really my hope in writing that book. And then letting them know, as you mentioned, sometimes when you see people who have achieved big goals in their lives, and, I've been fortunate to have done that, you don't always assume that they've had challenges. And I wanted people to know that, yeah, I had a lot of challenges in my life. And that's one of the reasons I also wanted to write the book, to talk about some of those challenges. My family, we lived paycheck to paycheck, and, sometimes we didn't have money and had to live with family members. So that was really tough. And then we could only afford later living in an area that had dirt roads. And that's where the last meningitis epidemic in the United States spread. And my younger sister, who was the smartest of us all, she became ill because her brain had an insatiably high fever. And she became special, more in the Special Olympics kind of way. And then my mom, being a mama bear, realized that and moved us to another part of town, but I hated it. Because, my family, it was a very, even though it was a dirt road, it was happiness to me, kids playing around, very monocultural, type of environment. Pretty much everyone spoke Spanish. So it was the Sanchez, Comunes, Gomez neighborhood. And I moved to the Glemboskis, the Shrams, the Wallaces. It was a big adjustment. And, writing about those kinds of impacts that it has on a child. And it could have really set me back for life. But luckily I got involved in Girl Scouts, and there's a big part about how Girl Scouts taught me how to create opportunity. And that's a lifelong skill. I mean, if you think about people in poverty or near poverty, you don't know how to get out of poverty. If you knew how to, you would get out of it. And so Girl Scouts taught me how to create opportunity. And then through the cookie program taught me important sales skills. In fact, one of my most important skills that I learned was never walk away from a sale until you've heard no at least 3 times.
I remember you talking about that.
Well, I got to tell you, Rita, that has been so helpful in my entire career. So as that little 7-year-old girl, I began developing that muscle. So the book is really that story of how, how I overcame some big challenges in my life, and never lost the focus of wanting to live my life potential. And so many people were helpful, and systems were helpful. Head Start, I was part of the pilot program there. Public libraries, huge shout out to librarians and our public libraries out there. They were my Google before Google or search engines.
Well, you talk in the book about being forced to save up $5 to get a library card in case you damaged a book.
Well, there's a lot about culture too. My father was very Mexican traditional, and I had an older brother. I have an older brother, and he and I were very competitive, but my father really favored him. And Mario wonderful guy, but he didn't have to save money to go get a library book. I had to save $5, which in that time was an immense amount of money. so that just as you said, what happens if I damaged a book or something like that? So, I realized that there were these very strong gender roles that I also had to overcome during that time.
Well, you're right. And the book, well, I think one of the most interesting passages for me, so I'm the child of German immigrants, and, Germans are, yeah, well, yes, lists and order and, everything sort of, and you write in the book about a meeting at the initial Girl Scouts when you first joined, and that they were planning their year and planning like what had to be done and like how many cookies did each of us have to sell, and that was such a revelation, and I think many times when I talk to people who are wrestling with poverty or whatever, the immediate pressure is so intense that to do that, like just to carve out the time to say, well, how many cookies would I need to sell? It doesn't come naturally. I mean, that's, and I thought that was just such an interesting passage in the book.
That was transformative. That and the focus on safety, like there was, how you hand somebody scissors. They taught me not pointy edge first. And I remember thinking, wow, if they care about how I pass scissors, and there's all sorts of rules around scissors, like, not only how you pass them, but never run with scissors, like, whoa. So, I really, I found that to be so, it was almost like a balm to my soul. My family had had so much chaos with my sister being sick, moving to an entirely new neighborhood, just all those changes, and to suddenly be involved in an organization that was thinking about, your safety first, paramount, but then also how did they develop you and asking you, what do you want to do? And you had this whole panoply of things that you could do. And it was just really a wonderful experience. And it taught me that you could make your dreams come true, that's how you create opportunity. You have a goal or a dream, and then you break it up into smaller increments. And then you have checkpoints along the way. Now that, to everyone listening on those podcasts, you know how to do that, because otherwise you wouldn't be here listening on the podcast, right? But to somebody, as you mentioned, in poverty or near poverty, they don't know how to do that because of the immediacy, because of life situations, or there isn't anyone in their network who has figured out how to get out. And so suddenly, having that, lesson taught me how to create opportunity, and then I got to practice it over and over and realize that it did work.
Well, talk about the don't walk away with that no 3 times, because you've got some great stories about those experiences.
Well, I'll say that, again, being raised in a traditional Mexican household, kids are supposed to not speak first to adults, but wait till you're spoken to. And what my troop leader realized, maybe I was shy, but I certainly didn't speak first to adults. I wasn't going to make my goal of all those boxes of cookies I wanted to sell. And that's when she said, never walk away from a sale until you've heard no 3 times. And that was so important, because you first sell to people in your family, at church, etc. And then you run out. I had big goals and I ran out of people to sell. So I had to talk to, strangers. And I know. And the first time I spoke to a neighbor, I had just never spoken to her, but just seen her come in and out of her station wagon. And I went up to her and asked her. She looked at me, she said, no. And I just stood there rooted in place. And I like to say that there was a thought bubble over my head. It said, Troop Leader Mrs. Provine said, never leave the side of a sale until you've heard no 3 times. So I looked at her and said, is there anybody else at your home that would want to buy Girl Scout cookies? And she said no again. And at that point, she's looking at me like, little girl, move, go. And then I said, would there be anybody's day you could make by buying Girl Scout cookies? And she bought 1 box. And I was like, yes. So that's persistence, resilience, that was so important. So as that 7-year-old girl, it really taught me that. And so it taught me, how do you get to a yes? And so I began exercising that muscle, so that, as I got older in school and people told me I couldn't do things, how do I get it so I can get to that yes? And, my band director, I played percussion, and we got the timbales, which are these heavy drums. And usually first chair got to choose your marching instrument. And so he said I couldn't play timbales. And I said, well, why not? And he said, well, because you're a girl. And so that's my first no.
Okay.
Well, that's not going to change. And then I said, why not? He said, because they're too heavy. And I said, okay, now I know what I have to solve for, right? I have to solve for strength. And to be honest, back then they were really heavy and they were a third of my body weight. They were 35 pounds.
Do you remember why you wanted them so much?
Well, the timbales, if you think about it, that like drives the crowd. That drives the marching band. That's like, that's like, that makes things happen. So I loved playing the timbales. So, and I had been playing timpani. So timpani is sort of like the timbales out in the marching band. And all summer long, I did my version of strengthening. Remember, my family didn't belong to a gym. We didn't have a search engine. So I just did it my own way, which was riding my bike to high school. And then I found stones and I got my mom's raincoat, which she didn't appreciate. And I filled the raincoat with stones and I'd carry those. And, it's interesting, when I was writing the book, I called my older brother and I said, I'm remembering this. Is that right? He goes, oh God, you were such a dork. You embarrassed me so much. But it strengthened me enough that when I started high school, I went to the band director. We went out to the field. I strapped him on. I just went up and down the football field. And he looked and he goes, everyone's going to be mad at me because they're going to say, why did you make the girl carry the heavy drums? They're not going to know that you wanted to play them. But that was a great example. Mm-hmm. And then also the college counselor, she didn't want, when she saw me, she said, why are you in here in the lobby? And I said, because I signed up for college counselor. And she said, girls like you don't go to college. And unfortunately, in that era, statistically, she was correct. As an educator, that was wrong to say. And, again, that was my first no.
Okay.
I walked into her office and sat down. She had no choice but to follow me. And so we sat down. She said, what do you want to study? And I said, I want to be an engineer. And she laughed. And so I became a rocket scientist. So, there you go. In my career, that was also really helpful. And I think about one time I was working for this company and I wanted to go and work in the international, especially because part of that international division had Latin America and I spoke Spanish. I thought I've had a great sales record in the domestic. This should be easy. It was not at all. It took months to break in. And finally, I did some data analysis and I showed that if they had the same kind of penetration in multinational accounts in that territory that I had domestically, that particular division would have hundreds of millions of dollars. And I stalked one of the senior leaders, the senior vice president of that division. And I got my little elevator moment with him and we went into a team room and I had the presentation printed out and he flipped through it. And then he's like, this is great. And he said, he was taking it and I put my hand on it. And he looked at me, he said, well, can't I have this? And I said, you can, but it comes with me. And so I finally was able to break in. So that was that, don't take no. How do you find the yes? So that was so important in my career.
Well, and you had both the sort of ethnic disadvantage and a gender disadvantage. I mean, that's a lot to overcome, right?
But, yeah, the gender thing was much bigger. One of the other things is, I love the movie Hidden Figures. And there's that scene where she's running to the bathroom. And I remember thinking, I didn't even have a bathroom in my first job. And, that's a huge, you are not welcome here sign. But I solved the problem, right? I'm like, okay, I'm not going to let this discourage me. I found the buildings that were nearby that had a women's bathroom. I brought a bike into work. I drank very little fluid. and after 6 weeks, they finally got a porta potty. And I remember it, a brand new porta potty, and it said hers on it. So that's that persistence, resilience. I didn't get mad. I kept doing my job. But I just solved for the problem. So how do you find that common ground? So I'm very grateful for that experience.
That is fascinating. So they didn't have a women's room?
Oh, no. But, I was on the White House Commission for Educational Excellence. But, architecture tells you so much. And the women's bathrooms were afterthoughts. They were recently added. Okay. And so when we would have breaks, the guys could just stroll, to the nearby plentiful men's restrooms. All the women, we would be hiking it sometimes to another floor, and they were small. So we'd all be waiting in line. And then finally we'd like run back, and the guys had been networking because they had plenty of time. So, the architecture really does tell you a lot. And I was I was speaking to some congresswomen recently, and they talked about, it's really just been recent that we've had a women's lounge area and a bathroom. It's the buildings will tell you a lot about what your society highlights.
Oh, they absolutely do. I will never forget, I was on the design team for the Microsoft CEO Summit for some years. And they would have this thing at the big Microsoft building where they do all the demos and all that kind of stuff. It's a very beautiful building. And it's the first time in my life, and for not good reasons, where the women just breezed right in and breezed right out, and the guys are like in a line around the block. And I thought to myself, that says a lot about society, right? So I'd love to go back to the college counseling office, because you catch people in middle school, you get them interested in STEM subjects, if we're lucky as a society, if we're lucky they get that interest. You're sitting across the table from somebody who doesn't believe in you. What happens next?
Well, she told me no, and girls aren't engineers. And I said, I will, I'm going to do it. And I had already done a lot of the research on that. So I had gone to the university, I discovered, industrial engineering or systems engineering was perfect for me, because it's a blend of people, processes, and systems and coming together. And I really liked that. And I thought, wow, this is just a great embodiment of what I like to do, what I'm good at. Scale is important, love of numbers is important to all of that. So, I told her that's what I wanted to do, but she was pretty much, you're kind of on your own. So on that, I applied for so many scholarships back then. And I'll remember I earned a scholarship through Sandia Labs, and they had not had a girl. In fact, it's interesting because in the application, it didn't have your gender. And so when I earned the scholarship and apparently, did really well on the exam, did really well on the essay, when they found out that I was a female, that they came down and interviewed me. And I remember the principal calling me into, the office and said, these gentlemen want to interview you. And they really did grill me about, testing my love of math, could I actually do math? And then I had also mentioned that I changed the oil regularly on our cars. I had to go methodically, step by step, how I actually changed the oil in the car. I had been doing that, but they really didn't believe that somebody like me, this girl, and a Hispanic girl to boot, could really do engineering. And, they really wondered, they're like, are you going to quit? Are you going to get married? Are you going to finish college? We're giving you this great opportunity. Can you actually see it through? And I remember thinking that, yeah, of course. And it was a very strange interview, but it was, I think it was very telling as well. And I ended up having a great experience there. And I'm grateful to them because they gave me such a great scholarship. I was able to graduate without debt, which is fantastic.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people listening who would be delighted to be in that position. So you ended up going to Stanford at one point?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I did. I actually, right after college with my undergraduate from New Mexico State University, I went to go work at NASA's Jet Propulsion Labs. Really a great experience. But again, when you think about it, I didn't know it at the time, but I ended up at Christmas time. Christmas time for, when you're working on a mission, and I got to work on 2 missions, the Voyager 2 and Solar Polar. Christmas time is when they're passing by a planet, or whatever they're trying to, the star, or whatever they're trying to study and analyze. I got in just as we were doing, it was Voyager 2 was going by Jupiter, and they assigned me to do all this data analytics on all its 2 of its moons, Io and Europa. And, back then, everybody didn't have a computer at their desk with a live monitor feed coming in of all the visual images. They set up screens in the cafeteria, and we literally spent the night, because when it's going by, that's your chance.
Yeah.
And spent the night. And some of those iconic images you have of Jupiter were back from that opportunity. That was great. And then I also worked on the Polar Solar Probe. It's been renamed to Parker Solar Probe, and it's on its way to the sun right now. But working on that mission, I realized some of the materials we needed had not even been developed. This was going to take decades. You think about nuclear, just the heat. You think about just the wind out in space as well by solar flares, all this stuff. And I thought, holy cow, it's going to be decades. And at that point, I had gotten accepted into Stanford. And I said, okay, I've had a great time at NASA. I'm going to go to Stanford and study engineering. And I'm grateful that it all worked out that way because, one, I was able to earn my master's in engineering, but also landed at, ground zero of what was happening with the internet. And,
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was fantastic.
Uh-huh. So what did you do after the master's?
Oh, so, I actually, it's an interesting story because back to the whole gender thing, all my cohorts were getting jobs at all these, fast growing technology companies, and I wasn't getting in. And so I ended up getting a job as a facilities engineer at IBM. And you think that's not very glamorous, but I was also, that whole thing about getting to a yes, that teaches you about innovation. And so I began taking what was standard manufacturing layouts and providing two examples, providing the standard way of solving it, but then also an innovative way. And the first time I did that, it improved production by 35%.
Whoa.
And that, I know, everybody's like, whoa, what happened here? And then IBM made a huge bet on building a facility that was basically the size of a small shopping mall, 765,000 square feet. I still remember. And because I had been innovated, I was allowed to be the design manufacturing engineer, which was a huge, huge honor. And again, if you're thinking about that kind of high-tech manufacturing, people are wearing, those bunny suits, those high-tech bunny suits, because you can't have any contamination on the product. So everything is white and sterile. So I did several things to make sure that we had increased worker productivity. So one of the things, mostly there were women, and so I made sure the women's bathrooms were close. That mattered because it takes a while. It takes a good 7 minutes to disrobe, then go through the air shower, and then when you take off your clothes, right, but then coming back into work. So, a break could be 15 minutes. So how do you reduce that time frame? So even thinking through the entire way of going through the lockers, the air wash, the location of the bathrooms, really increased productivity. Also providing color. They had never thought of providing color. And that was really important because then you could even think about it not only brightened up the space, it was easy to identify where you were in this large manufacturing space. And then the other thing I did that was really very innovative is, even though it was inside, put in windows. And I had to fight so hard for those windows. They're like, what do they need to see? They're seeing into a hall. Well, it's like people in a bunny suit. You have very little, visibility. They actually kind of do want to see something, kind of look outside, even if outside is the hall. And then it turned out really interesting because then the management discovered that this is great. I don't have to put on the bunny suit to go in to see what's happening. I can actually look in. Those kind of, advances really made a difference. And I was very proud that IBM used that for many of its international, including some of the stock analysts, to bring them through there to see some of our advanced manufacturing. So with that, IBM then said, why don't you go into sales and marketing and put me on that track? And that was really a great experience. And then from there, I worked at IBM and then at Apple and a few other companies, Autodesk, software and networking. And that was really purposeful because I had gone early in my career and I'd said to one of my managers, I wanted to advance. And they laughed again, women, engineer, you're not going to do it. I said, okay, if I had to have skills, what kind of skills and background do I need? And they said, you need to have product marketing, you need to have sales, you need to have P&L. And it would probably be good if it were in different areas, like, networking, software. And I set about methodically doing that. So, personal computers worked at Apple as well as IBM. Software worked at Autodesk. Networking, I worked at Tandem, Montgomery Bass, and then back at Dell. So
you were very intentional about the roles you took.
Yes, very, very.
I mean, one of the things, I run a program called Women in Leadership at Columbia, which you've very kindly guest lectured at. And one of the things I find is a lot of people, and maybe it happens to men too, but I know for sure for a lot of women, they just kind of drift from thing to thing, and they're not sort of asking the question, well, if I want to get there, what are the pieces of activity I need to do to get there?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that was really intentional. And again, getting P&L experience was really tough. I didn't realize what a trailblazer I was. I was just living my life. But in 2018, they did a study of the number of women like me who were directors or executives in Silicon Valley, and it was less than 1%. So basically not measurable, right? But I was doing this like decades ago. But I was so intentional about I needed to have P&L responsibility, because if you didn't have P&L responsibility, you really weren't going to get into the executive tier. So then I had to then flip back into, because I had been working domestic, and then flip back into international. And so they were like, all right, Latin America, we'll give you this. It's not much in software. It's all being pirated at the time. So at Autodesk, they brought me in, and really the sales were negligible, and piracy was huge. But
who was the CEO at the time? Do you remember?
Carol Bartz.
Oh, it was Carol. Okay, yeah. That must have been fascinating.
Carol Bartz.
I can only imagine the conversations the two of you would have had.
I know. Yeah. So. That was a great opportunity. And one of the things I realized, again, back to innovation, most software companies at the time were taking a very punitive approach, like, threatening companies with legal action. And, Autodesk software, AutoCAD, it was expensive. It was almost $4,000. And you're talking about Latin America. And I realized I had a daunting challenge ahead of me, because when I first arrived into Mexico City, and I was in a cab, and I said to the cab driver what I worked for, and he goes, AutoCAD. He reached underneath the seat and got out a CD of pirated bootleg software. He goes, I have it right here. And I thought, I'm basically having to figure out how to sell a $4,000 product against free, right? And so going back to multinationals, I realized we had a lot of multinationals and large corporations in those markets that really wanted to be global, business leaders. And so they didn't want to be running their business on pirated software. And so I worked to get them some really great pricing to legalize the software. So say you were, a large oil company in Mexico or Venezuela, or a large copper company in Chile, or whatever, you had thousands of licenses of thousands of versions of the software, but not the licenses. So we gave this amazing volume discount. And then at the same time, we also trained the reseller channel. Because if you think about it, if there's no one selling software, there's no one able to support you. So we said, look, not only are we going to give you the legal software, so you get the manuals, you get the virus-free stuff, you're getting the cutting edge stuff. You're also now going to have a reseller channel that knows how to support you. And it really dramatically increased the reseller channel's success, business profitability. They also sold a lot more peripherals, the printers and all that. And so the business ecosystem took off. And we headed up the first developer conference in Brazil. It wasn't Microsoft, it wasn't anybody else. It was for AutoCAD. Because if you think about AutoCAD, it's a design software. So every country has its own laws. And so because now there was a market, you could now build on that add-on software that could work with AutoCAD, that would customize it for the peculiarities or the, specifics of a market. We increased sales to 20 million so rapidly. And actually, my little division became half of the company's profit one quarter. So yeah, so that was a great experience.
That must have been amazing. What did it feel like for you going back to that kind of environment, where you had the Gomez's and the Chavez's and the, those kind of people? Did it feel really weird, or did it sort of feel comfortable, or no different?
Okay, so that's a great question, because I remember being at the Tamanaco Hotel in Caracas, Venezuela, and I realized I was so intent on getting the role and being able to, bring value to the company and to the distribution channel. But anyway, now they were going to be in this ballroom, and I had to be at the front of the stage talking to them, not only about networking, but doing it in Spanish. And I remember, being on the bed and going, oh my God, I feel like the dog that caught the car. And now it's like, I'm there. But that experience was so fantastic for me, because it taught me about reseller channel. And these are folks that they don't directly report to you. Mm-hmm. You have to inspire them, and you have to, and influence them. And that was great learning ground for that, of how do you influence and inspire people who don't report to you? And so how do you get to a win-win? And obviously being able to then develop a channel where large corporations were buying in every market, that was great, because it brought money to them. And then being able to sell peripherals, and then being able to sell the training. And we made those investments, and boy, did business take off.
That's fantastic. You know what it makes me realize is that you were inventing ecosystems before we understood that was so important. And, so many of the, like when I look at early movers in industries, when you think about innovators and they move, and a lot of times what they don't understand is my product by itself is not going to get the customer's complete experience designed. And for that, I have to bring in these people I don't control, who are going to be partners, whose interests are sort of aligned with mine. And it's a whole ecosystem play. And that's not always obvious when people come into a setting like that.
Yeah, I had the fortune of, kind of, what did Autodesk have to lose? It didn't have much sales at all. But also identifying what it would take to support large multinational companies requires an ecosystem. But you're right, I didn't think about that as intentionally. I just was solving the problem.
Right.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, I think that was really the first big wave of these. The way I talk about it is, in academia, we've always had this distinction between what you can manage in a market and what you have to manage using a hierarchy. That's the academic way of talking about it. Basically, it says if you can't control the risk of opportunism, if you don't know the value on either side of the transaction, if you don't know what your losses are going to be and that kind of thing, then you have to kind of run it within an organization. Whereas if you have more certainty about those things, you can run it like a market. And what increasingly we're seeing these ecosystems doing is they're replacing what used to have to be done in a company with these sort of broader negotiated agreements.
You are 100% right. The supply chain, I think, is a really great example of that right now, because the global supply chain's been disrupted. It was really designed for efficiency, but now you have to have resilience, you have to have capacity, you have to have different nodes. So you do have to think about things in a systematic ecosystem type of way.
So do you think we're going to see a shift away from this sort of maniacal focus on efficiency? Do you think we're going to start to see other considerations come in now?
Well, I think efficiency is going to be gained in different ways, but resilience is going to have to be part of it. And there's just so much happening in the geopolitical world that if you don't build in resilience and capacity and, how are you going to deal with, the challenges that are happening, whether it's weather, whether it's trade agreements or, some other types of disruption, how are you going to deal with it? So, we've had a period where we didn't have to be concerned about that as much, and now we do. So I really do see that those things are going to be
well, I'll be interested to see how it affects pricing models, because right now we haven't priced in a lot of those externalities. We just look at the unit price of something and take that at face value. We don't really understand the deeper trade-offs represented by that. So before we go there, so let's talk about the Girl Scouts and
Sure.
how you got there and what you did, because I think you've taken this organization that was always wonderful. I mean, I always thought the Girl Scouts was just amazing, but you've really kind of transformed them for whatever the next century is going to be. So tell us a little bit about that journey.
Well, I'm very grateful to Stanford, because somebody was doing some graduate research and called me one day and said, you're one of the first, and unfortunately one of the few Hispanics who've ever gotten their graduate engineering degree from Stanford. And they wanted to know why. And they said, frankly, we weren't really recruiting that hard from people in that part of the country. And how was it that you were when you knew about Stanford, you had the credentials, you were able to come in and, you did well, and now you've had this amazing career. How did that happen? And I was so grateful for that researcher, because she kept asking me questions after questions, and because I didn't know. And she's like, where did it start? And I realized it started from Girl Scouts. One night looking at the stars, and my troop leader, she taught me that those weren't just twinkly lights, because if you're in New Mexico, there's a lot of beautiful stars, but they're planets and they're constellations and systems. And I was just mesmerized by that. And she remembered it later, and then she encouraged me to earn my science badge. And that was really great, because I failed a lot trying to make an Estes rocket.
I remember that story.
If I had been in a non-single gender, by the third or fourth time, the teacher would have said, Sylvia, this isn't for you. But in Girl Scouts, it's like, you keep solving it until you succeed. And so I did. And, we say failure is first attempt in learning. And when I saw that rocket go up, I was so excited. And I remember thinking, I can do this. I can do science. I can do math. And that set me on that path. And like any kid, when you do something and you're good at it, you do more of it, and then you get better at it. And so that's what really set me on that path of choosing math and science electives. And when I understood that, I thought, oh my gosh, I always buy Girl Scout cookies, but I began to get involved, and I had the good fortune of meeting Ann Richards, the former governor of Texas, and she put my name in for the national board. So I was able to serve on the national board for 8 years. And, being on a board, you have to be strategy and governance and not operations. And in my head, I would always be playing this game of, if I was in an operating role, what would I do? Because I couldn't say that, but I played that in my head. And then after 8 years, the former CEO, she left, and they had an opportunity, and they asked me to step in as interim. Well, suddenly those 8 years of what ifs, I got to go to town on. And, first and foremost, a girl experience. And, how do you make it relevant for girls? And then the iconic cookie program, and really modernizing that, which included taking on the baker's IP. So that's from my technology background, making sure you own your IP, own your cookie names, the logistics, the supply chain, all of that. We really completely revamped all of that. And so we were able to grow sales 120 million during my tenure, from 760 to over $881 million, and moving 200 million boxes or packages of cookies every year, so that was something from, I was very intentional. The baker contracts were decades old. People said, are you really wanting to take this on? And I was like, yes. And great experience there. But the other one was girls. And I'm so happy. And right now I'm actually synthesizing what I've learned, a deep dive in Gen Z, a deep dive in what they're living. This is a digital generation. So I got to do a huge deep dive there. And most of them had a digital device in their hand. And, they wanted to have more control over it. I mean, they have digital lives, and they wanted improvement of how do you manage that, and how do I get reflected in it, because so many things, so many games don't reflect it, so many applications are being developed, don't include them. And so we began to look at how do we create our programs, the iconic badges. And so I said, we need to do more STEM badges. And the team said to me, oh yeah, we have a roadmap. We're going to do 6 new badges by 2025. And I was like, no. And so we switched to the agile style of programming. And so that meant we focused on what we did really well, but then we worked with partners who did other parts of that very well. And so, in less than 3 years, we came out with 144 new badges. 119 of them were in STEM,
Mhm.
robotics, cybersecurity, I mean, design thinking, which is great, automotive, coding, programming, software development. It's just so many great applications that are very useful for girls' lives. And we really used our knowledge of how girls learn and lead to make them relevant, because so much of STEM programming has been designed for how do you get boys interested in STEM, and not how do you get girls interested in the way that they learn. I mean, we're talking about children. We're talking about 5 and 7-year-old girls or 9-year-old girls. How do you get her interested in cybersecurity? And I will say that was probably, you talk about, going to the edges. And that was really, again, when you're immersed in it, you don't think that's what you're doing. But hearing girls, as we were developing programs, we were always doing focus groups across the country. And over, I heard from girls, I care about my digital life. I care about my safety online. And no one was addressing that. So we know it is cybersecurity. They know it is, I want tools so I'm not bullied or harassed, or bad things don't happen to my data or my persona, etc. So we created cybersecurity badges, and I will say, holy cow, even when we introduced them, over 1 billion media impressions.
Yeah, I remember it made a huge splash.
But the girls loved it. In the first year, over 180,000 badges, cyber badges, earned across America. And we're talking rural, urban, and suburban communities. And I'll tell you, I was in Alabama, and in Birmingham, Alabama, and these families had traveled, and they lived in rural Alabama, and they came to thank me. They said, there is no way there are no programs in our communities that are teaching our daughters these cutting edge skills. And one of our daughters wrote about all the badges and what she learned, and she got a 4-year full ride scholarship to college. We wouldn't have been able to afford that. And so I knew we were giving girls the skills they needed. And what I loved is the take action, especially around cybersecurity. I could tell you where girls had just earned their badges, because I would hear from senior centers, because girls had gone to those centers because so many of them knew that their grandparents had been frauded, and they wanted to do something about that. And the senior centers thought, well, I have open Wi-Fi. It makes it easy for everybody, right? Yeah, but that makes it easy for everybody to steal from, the data from, their grandparents or the relatives that were in these centers. So we really saw how this really gave girls the skills that they could make a difference. And then one of my favorite impactful stories was a girl in the agricultural area who said she was studying cybersecurity and really earning all the badges because she knew that tractors and combines don't even have steering wheels anymore, because they're controlled by the Internet of Things. And she said, what happens to the safety and security of our food supply when the Internet of Things gets hacked? Right. And I thought, wow. So that was a great, great experience. So I really do feel what an amazing legacy to bring the organization, its iconic cookie program, strengthening the relationships with the councils. We also got 99% of the membership on the same operating system. And I think that was my good old distribution experience. Right. You have all these councils and they don't report to you. You have to inspire.
That's one of the challenges, right? It's a federation.
Yeah.
Just to go back to how girls learn for a minute, you tell a wonderful story about teaching pretty young girls about viruses, computer viruses, not kind of living with now. And it involved, I think, a circle and yarn, and maybe just share that with our readers.
Oh, yeah.
It's such a vivid illustration of the difference between how girls learn and how boys learn.
Absolutely. So you've got to make it interesting. So to get girls interested in STEM, there's 3 things. So you have to get them interested. Once you've got them interested, then you can build on the confidence, and then you can build on the competence. And a lot of STEM activities are built around things boys are already interested in. And if they've been interested, they're probably already confident in them. So then you're building on competence. Well, with girls, like, how do you get them interested in malware? And, physical networks, right? You talk to a 7 and 8-year-old girl saying, we're going to teach you about malware. And it's like, and then talking about the physical networks, the first level or layer of a physical network is the physical level. They'd be like bored out of their mind. But what we did is we know girls, and that's, Girl Scouts, that's their expertise, is knowing girls. And so, there's psychologists, there's educational doctorates. There's a lot of people who really understand how girls learn and lead. And so getting girls, 7 and 8 year girls, to sit in a circle and talk, turns out they love doing that. And then you give them a ball of yarn, and then they pass the ball of yarn as they talk to one another. And being girls, they also make sure that every girl has spoken that gets that ball of yarn passed to her, but not spoken to each other, right? And so then you show that there's a physical network. And that's like, oh, that's really cool. And each of them are quote unquote nodes, right? So you don't start it from you are each nodes, but first you show them how they're all interconnected and interrelated. And then you say one of them, let's call her Rachel, she has a virus. And maybe Sarah didn't talk to her, but they both talked to Rita. Well, guess what? You got the virus from Rachel because Rita spoke to Sarah, and then it spread. Then they're like, oh, wow. And so in a few minutes, you have girls now interested in computer networking, interested in viruses and what to do about stopping that, right? And now they're interested, now they're confident, they can do this. This is not that hard. And then you can build on the competence. And we have really seen that. I mean, all over the country, how girls have really responded. And they really do care about how do you protect your digital life. And, I like to say IOTP, the Internet of Things, the focus was on the S of IOTP. And people go, there's no S in IOTP. And I said, that's the point. That's right. The point.
Yeah, I mean, the most vulnerable part of your house can be your toaster that's, got an app on it, And the guys that make toasters aren't worried about global security breaches. Right. And so not having thought about safety and security when you're thinking about the Internet of Things has created a tremendous amount of challenges now with how do we protect our voting? How do we protect our electrical grid? How do we protect our financial systems, our food supply, right? How do I make sure my grandmother doesn't get frauded, right? All of those things, we hadn't thought about that. So it's really putting the S, safety and security, back into the IOTP. Because I want to have, my vision was having an entire generation of girls who could go, and when they're adults, maybe they'd be talking about a design, and they'd say, oh, we can't do that. We can't retrofit that, because I would want that woman to say, this impacts my children, impacts my son, my daughter. And if somebody goes, well, we have to reprogram our sensors, I would want her to say, reprogram sensors. I did that earning my robotics badge in Girl Scouts in middle school. No big deal. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So something that has come up a lot in the course of my journey with women in leadership and other places is people question whether having same-sex environments, particularly for women and girls, is an outmoded anachronism, or is it something there? And I'll put my cards on the table. I went to Barnard College, and I'm a big believer that there are times when that single gender environment is just super helpful. And I wonder, I would love to know your speculation on that. And
yeah, first of all, we're talking about children. Right? We're not talking about 18-year-olds and older. We're talking about children. So that's an important aspect. One of the great examples I'd like to use was about Legos. If you think about like a second grade teacher who's thinking, I want to teach my entire class, both boys and girls, about Legos and about a STEM thing using Legos. And she says, Legos, they're gender neutral. This will be okay. I'm going to say a gender neutral way of approaching a STEM exercise. Well, she introduces it, boys' eyes light up. They've been getting Legos since they were 3 years old, right? So they're totally interested and they're confident, and they immediately go putting it together. Most girls do not get Legos as gifts. Mm-hmm. And so now they're like, Legos, that's I step on my brother's Legos. I'm not, I haven't really used them. So, and remember, younger girls tend to be quick learners. And so they're used to, whenever there's an assignment, they're the ones doing it quickest. And so that second grade teacher has the girls and the boys do this. And she notices the boys complete it faster. They're confident, they do it. And the girls are more tentative, they ask questions. And so she thinks, look, I chose a gender neutral, maybe boys like STEM and girls don't. Well, Girl Scouts, we used Legos quite a bit, but it was in single gender environment. And so you could fail. Back to my example of rocketry. I could fail many times. That was okay. No one finally said, pull the plug, Sylvia. You failed 4 times. Now you failed 5 times. Come on. So that, I think it really does inform quite a bit. And I will admit, if you think about a bell curve, I'm like on the far end of liking to do things like rockets and cars. But what we realized in developing all of our STEM badges is we had to make them relevant to what girls cared about. So if you're doing, in fact, we just introduced, and I was on Good Morning America with Mary Barra, with automotive, with automotive badges. And, it turns out that, there are some girls that are really interested in building a car and racing a car. But that's actually that small bell curve, like what I was. The vast majority of girls don't. So how do you get girls interested in vehicles and modes of transportation? Well, we found out that if you said to girls, okay, you have to design something to get, objects from point A to point B quick, it was like, not interested. Okay, but here's the thing. There's this injured animal. And you've got to figure out a way to get that injured animal to safety and to get help. Oh my gosh, girls are really interested in that. They really want to figure out, and then they get really interested. So should we have cages? How do we make sure that, it's easy to get the animal in and out? All sorts of things that they suddenly get really involved in. And so making it around what things that they care about, which usually means making the world a better place. And from the design part, then the engineering, and then how do you manufacture it? But you've got to get them interested first. And I'll give you one other example. We found with our robotics badges that, again, that tail end of the bell curve with the girls that are interested in robotics. How do you get the center part? And so we worked on this program where girls were introduced to an elephant herd in Africa with a matriarch elephant that was the lead. And there were baby elephants in the herd. And the matriarch got ensnared in a hunter's trap, and she lost a limb. So the challenge was creating a robotic replacement for that matriarch elephant. But if you couldn't do it, then she and the herd, including the baby elephants, died. Now you have girls who have never ever been interested in robotics. They want to save that elephant. They want to save those baby elephants. And so then suddenly they're caring about, elbow joints, they're caring about pounds per square inch, they're caring about all sorts of things because it was developed in a way that was interesting to them.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And, it's interesting too. We've been talking a lot in my Women in Leadership is running right now. We've been talking a lot about Carol Gilligan's work, which fundamentally changed the way people look at the socialization of girls versus boys. And she really was the foundational person behind the whole concept of emotional intelligence, which now, of course, everybody recognizes. The more senior you get, the more important that is, right? But I think this whole notion that there is a benefit to being in a safe environment, where you can try things that maybe nobody else has, tried either, and that can really work. So, so what's next? What are you up to next?
I am so grateful. After those 12 years at Girl Scouts, 8 years on the board, 4 years, really being immersed in Gen Z, I'm really synthesizing and looking around. There's so much going on around sustainability, digitization. Clearly, how are we going to absorb, the impact and the benefits of Gen Z, but also how do we help them? There's some pretty troubling statistics happening in Gen Z. The rate of suicide has really gone up quite a bit in the last few years. Really thinking about, how do I use all these skills and scalability to make an impact? But it's also nice to take a bit of a break. For 4 years in a row, I was traveling over 200 days a year. And it's great to be able to, to think, to ponder, to synthesize, to read your great book, to exercise a little bit more regularly, all of those things.
Absolutely.
But I am looking to see, where can I make an impact? I think, we are going to continue to electrify the world. And I really believe that, we do need to make space for people being human beings. We're not just human doing. So we've got to turn off the devices and enjoy the world, but we've got to have that world to enjoy. So if we're going to be electrifying the world, how do we make that most efficient? And we've really got to reduce the carbon emissions in creating electricity. And that is everything from the supply chain to how do you create electricity. So, there's so many great opportunities. So I'm really looking at how can I best use my skills to make a difference. I'm not sure if it's going to be at a CEO role possibly, or, on board of directors. There's just so many great opportunities.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, I think one of the things that I hear a lot from people, that I interact with is almost this sense of helplessness, that the problem seems so big and so daunting. And so like, what could I possibly do as someone who wants to make a difference? And one of the things that I find so inspiring about your story is that you never looked at it that way. You're always like, well, how do I break this down and do the next piece and then the next piece and then the next piece? So how would you advise, and I think a lot of it is that building that muscle, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how would you advise people to do that, to like try to make a positive difference in a way that they can manage? Are there any suggestions that you have?
Yeah, what is your skill set? So that's really important. I've had a lot of people who say, I want to make a difference, but then they go do something that is so outside of their skill set and that they don't enjoy it. And so they give up. Right now, if you want to, let's just use nonprofits as an example. If you want to help out a nonprofit, they are all being forced to move to data. And that's not really their sweet spot. They're there about helping people. But to get grants, you have to show data that an impact, that what you're doing really has a demonstrable impact on the clients that you're serving. So if you're somebody that's your day job, but you want to make a difference, you could come and work at a nonprofit or support them or volunteer and work on, whatever customer record management system they have, if they have one at all. But you can help make sense of the information that they have and make connections to help them fundraise, to help them possibly be more efficient. You may not have the skill set to be on the cutting edge, and it might actually be overwhelming. I mean, sometimes, some of us are not built for dealing with some of the challenges that youth or others are having, but we're really good at some of the other things that can help that organization fulfill the mission. So that would be one that I'd look at. And education, gosh, there's so much to do with education. But for yourself, if you're looking to, how can I make an impact? What is it that you're interested in? What are some of your skill sets? And, who would have thought, like when I was working in education, scalability I knew was going to be my competitive advantage and my analytics. Most people who are going in education don't say, I'm here because I can scale. But because of that, I wasn't daunted when people said, we did analysis and 11,000 kids needed eyeglasses in Central Texas. That's a huge number. Not daunted, break it down. How do you get a delivery? Who do you partner with? And I'm just so thrilled that now there's a vision van. There's also now a dental van going around. It turns out, in elementary school, the number one reason kids miss school is because of dental pain. So if you can solve for that, they can be in school more. The more they're in school, well, right now with COVID, it's a little different, but you're solving a really big reason that they're not in school. Vision, the numbers are really troubling. Even though there are vouchers, there's systems issues around getting the vouchers, and so many kids never get their vision corrected. And that, if you can't read, that sets your whole life on a different path. So think about what your skills are and how can you apply them into in maybe in non-traditional ways, but believe me, nonprofits, educational organizations really need those kinds of skill sets right now.
And arts organizations as well.
Oh my gosh, arts, dancing. Yeah. How do you fill up an auditorium? How do you make it more efficient, cost effective? How do you work supplier relationships, right? With, nonprofits, there's real money that goes through your organization. How do you make sure you get the best rates? All sorts of ways you can,
I would love to be at a board meeting of like the local theater company where you ask them that question.
I know.
That'd be great. Well, look, I asked for an hour. You've been so generous with your time. An inspiring conversation, and count me in for whatever your next chapter it has
Well,
to offer.
Rita, keep doing what you do. You inspire people around the world. You've made organizations better. And so I really thank you. And it's really been an honor.
It absolutely has. Sylvia Acevedo, thank you so much.